Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're reviewing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Directed by Christopher McQuarrie, Ethan Hunt and his IMF team must track down a dangerous weapon before it falls into the wrong hands. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 stars Tom Cruise, Hayley Atwell, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, and many, many more. So Jeffrey, what did you think about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1?
I reckon that this movie left me dead from excitement.
So you were excited?
Yeah, it was good. Well, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. I like the movie a lot, especially, I would say, the first 30 minutes and the last hour. The first 30 minutes actually has a lot of echoes from the first film, and I'm a gigantic fan of the first movie. But it's probably been a while since you've seen the first movie. I watched it on Saturday, so I watched it very recently. It is like an old school espionage conspiracy thriller. It's so good. It's so well directed. It's directed by Brian De Palma, who is an amazing director. He's really known for using these Dutch angles and a lot of really unconventional camera work. You add that to the tense way it's directed, the tense way it's edited. It's just a great film. But anyway, they brought back the character of Kitteridge from the first film, and they have this very tense conversation in the first 30 minutes that is very reminiscent of the conversation they had in the aquarium restaurant in the first film. It was amazing to see those two actors go toe-to-toe again, it being shot in a very similar way, it having a very similar explosive climax. And obviously the last hour of the movie is just insane. It's crazy. I would think everything in the middle is a touch nonsensical for me. I did find this to be a little bit weaker than the prior three films, but I had an amazing time. I want to try to be balanced about this review because I do have some negative things to say, but I want to say off the bat, you should absolutely see this in a theater. Don't even think twice, just go.
Yeah, with this and Top Gun last year, Tom Cruise is really helping the movie theaters right now.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you in a lot of these regards, actually. I have a lot of criticism of the film, which I do look forward to getting into. But all in all, I don't want that to overshadow the fact that I really did enjoy this movie. I was on the edge of my seat during this film. I felt very tense during this movie in maybe ways that I hadn't felt tense in previous films. You expected that everybody was going to make it out okay in a way that I didn't feel in this movie. I felt like there were actual stakes. Something does happen to a couple of these characters that I didn't expect. I felt a lot of tension by those scenes. I do want to start with positives, and that is these amazing action sequences and also how they're shot, because they are so brilliantly and seamlessly shot. I love when you can't even notice the editing because they are so well put together. And not just that, what was possibly CGI and what was reality, the lines were so blurred in this film, and you know there's got to be some sense of CGI in this movie. For example, the thing that everybody's raving about is the big motorcycle jump that he takes off the mountain. That was done on like a planned ramp. So the ramp has been CGI'd out for that, but still it doesn't change that this was an actual real stunt. But I could not tell that that ramp wasn't there. I couldn't tell that it had been CGI'd out from the beginning. So the lines between real and what wasn't real or done on a soundstage was totally blurred. And for that, I found so much appreciation for.
So what you were saying about CGI, so how well it blends with the practical effects, I noticed in particular in the final sequence, which takes place on a train. We're not going to spoil too much of what happens and why there's so much tension on the train, but things go awry, and again, I, for the most part, could not tell what was CGI and what was real. It was such a perfect blending of practical effects and CGI, just absolutely amazing.
And to point out, there was one scene, I don't think this is spoiling it at all, but there's part of that scene that takes place on top of a train, which we've seen in many, many movies before. But this felt like they were actually on a train going through the hillsides of Europe. It was so crazy to me. Yeah. I couldn't even make any sense of that. I just don't even know how they did it.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
I have not seen Fast X, but I've heard that there's a lot of chase sequences in Fast X that also take place in Rome, but it's very clearly blue screened or green screened, whereas this movie is very clearly not. They're doing, I think, quite a bit in the real locales and obviously peppering in this or that, whatever they need to do in post-production, but you really cannot tell.
You could actually tell the difference between this and when we just watched Indiana Jones, because there's a big chase, there was actually a few chase sequences in Indiana Jones, but you could easily tell the difference between all the wides, which were very well done, by the way, in that movie, but the close-ups are what broke me from reality. You could tell we're definitely on a bike that was on a soundstage and being shifted around with all the buildings in the background being a blue screen. So that was so obvious to me, but in this movie, I could not tell.
They didn't invent this by any means. I just think they're especially good at it. Is the intercutting between various suspenseful things happening at once. There is a tremendous amount of tension in the last hour of this movie, and a lot of it comes from multiple very suspenseful situations all happening on top of one another until they collide in interesting ways. And the way that they cut back and forth, it heightens the tension so perfectly. And again, they didn't invent that, but they just seem to be the best at it, in my opinion. It's something I actually noticed when I rewatched Fallout the other day, too. That movie does that rather exceptionally, and they continue to do that here.
So I don't want to talk about all that for too long, because I do want to switch over to the acting in this movie, because there are so many actors in this film. For one, they're all amazing people. They're all great at what they do. I think Hayley Atwell was a great addition to this franchise. I think Pom Klementieff was a great addition to this franchise. I think some of the problem that I begin to have with this movie is just the sheer amount of actors that are in it playing these roles. It took away a little bit from some of the other characters in this film. And I remember you had mentioned coming out of the movie, one thing that you had said was, I wish there was more Simon Pegg.
Yeah.
And some of the characters ended up lacking because of this. I think Pom Klementieff is a good example. She almost felt like she was being utilized as a plot device, and that was the only purpose of her character. What's interesting is there was one part in this movie that takes place in St. Marco's Square, where there's this gigantic party, and all the parties are coming to meet to talk about this key that has to do with the narrative in this movie. They almost seem to joke about the amount of players that are involved, the amount of people that are searching for this key and are involved in a way that was a little bit meta to me. So I found these meta qualities to be very funny at times, like the scene in St. Marco's Square, but I felt like they didn't really do anything in the grand scheme of things to make the movie feel less clustered.
So they do that with Gabriel, who's the main stand-in for this AI that they're battling. And Gabriel has this backstory that we both thought was maybe from another movie that we forgot about, and we said, okay, is Gabriel from another movie and they're bringing him back? But no, they just phoned in a very strange, barely explained backstory between him and Ethan Hunt. So we were giving the film the benefit of the doubt that it's like, oh, that must be a callback that we don't understand or we don't remember. And once we got out of the film, we realized that he's a new character, which made it a bit more distressing. I guess we will see Gabriel again, right? So this is a part 1. We'll see a part 2. Maybe we'll get a little bit more Gabriel time and we'll see him as the monstrous villain that we all kind of hope he is. But that felt really ham-fisted to me.
In terms of the plot itself, we're talking about this AI thing that is basically controlling all of reality currently because it could compute all the probabilities of the actions that people will take. Recently seen in a lot of certain things. I know you had mentioned a show.
Devs, yeah. Alex Garland show.
And then it was also in Westworld, like season 3 or 4. So those two things were very paramount for these two shows. And it seems like almost a reporting of the same narrative. In the grand scheme of things, I don't go to the Mission Impossible movies to see a narrative or see a story for the most part. I go there for the stunts, the action, the suspense of it all. These are things that the Mission Impossible movies do very well. So it's not necessarily that I go for these things, but it is very glaring when you see something that's a narrative that's just almost cookie cutter, just pulled from something. But what I will say about that is I think in terms of Mission Impossible and Tom Cruise's character as Ethan Hunt, is it almost seems like the first time that he is incapable of being ahead of something, which I found very interesting for his character to have to deal with. It seems like he always comes up with a plan to fix this out, and then, surprise, he fixes it, fixes it at the end. Where in this case, it's really just about getting this key. That's like the only thing he can succeed at in this movie is getting this dang keys. But it did feel like unfinished in a way because it's just a part 1. In my head, I'm like, oh yeah, I know there's a part 2 coming. But still, I kind of felt like it was an incomplete thing as a singular movie.
I will say that the movie ends on an open-ended note, but I was kind of glad that they didn't do a hard cliffhanger because I always find those kind of annoying. I want to go back to AI for just a second because I don't think it's the subject matter so much as how it's used. It's used as a plot device often enough to just manufacture drama. A lot of what happens in the film doesn't seem authentic or actually rendered in an interesting way to me. It feels a lot more like this AI is a plot tool that they're just using to make certain events come about.
And if you think about it this way, it's also just weird the amount of parties who don't trust Ethan, mainly his own government. The amount of times this man has saved humanity, and these people are like, Ethan's gone off the walls again. We have to go after him. It seems like this comes up in every movie almost for some reason.
It's a little like the cliche of the police chief in all of those old police movies that are like, you blew up half a city block. And it's like, well, I got it done. Yeah, it's kind of like that.
So you ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I give this a B. It's very, very enjoyable. I did think that the prior 3 films in particular were a lot better about taking you into the world and making you believe all these things, because essentially all of these films are ridiculous. There's all these mirages, people are wearing masks, all that stuff. So I understand the criticism that somebody may come at me and say, well, these movies have always been impractical and somewhat divorced from reality, right? I think this film does an especially poor job of selling you the world the way that the other prior three films did. So again, I had an amazing time. The last hour of this movie is unreal. Like, see it in IMAX. It is utterly fantastic and so much fun to watch. There's a lot in here on a critical level that's pretty easy to pick apart, which I had less incentive to do for a lot of the prior Mission Impossible films.
I completely agree with you. I am going to give this an A- actually, though.
Damn, that's high.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I know it's high, and I know I have a lot of critical things to say, but it's so rare for a movie to have me basically my heart racing and feeling like I'm on the edge of the seat, like what's gonna happen. This movie did this really well this year. I think John Wick did that really well this year. One thing we didn't talk about was how the Mission Impossible movies are also very funny.
They're very funny,
They really know how to use comedy very well in these films, and just little tiny moments. There was this one great moment between Tom Cruise and Hayley Atwell as they're trying to find a safe car in the streets of Rome.
Yeah.
And then it's like beep beep, and then there's this little tiny Fiat that goes out. Tom Cruise doesn't know how to use the buttons, and that whole scene, the way it transpires by the end in a subway, there's a particular part that happens right at the end of the subway where he's walking from that scene, and it's really hilarious. I love feeling on the edge of my seat. I love feeling the stakes in this film. The big jumping off the cliff scene that we've seen already in promos everywhere, I thought that was just going to be the clip where he falls off. But then there's so much more to it. How that sequence is being done and filmed in real time with somebody skydiving was absolutely insane to me. I can't get over it. So yeah, I had an amazing time. I recommend seeing it. It was a blast. All right, and that's it for our review of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this latest installment in the Mission Impossible series? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.